Well, good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you this morning. A warm welcome to everyone here on site and also those that are in one of our 3 locations across the GTA today. But let's not ignore those that are watching from home and across the world. Thank you for joining us today. Over the course of the summer, we've been in a series entitled Summer in the Sun. And during this series, our evangelists and our next-gen ministers have been doing a phenomenal job actually leading us in the words and teachings of Jesus. And I hope that you agree with me. It's been a great summer. Every Sunday, along with our awesome volunteers, I keep our communities connected and together with our weekly immersive worship experience by using technology as a tool. By utilizing the tools today, we're able to minister to those 3 locations across the GTA, across Canada, and again, across the world, so that they can join us in worship here at Milestone. And it's truly been an honor to serve all of you in this capacity as we continue to grow and leverage technology for discipleship, but also to further our outreach to have a spiritual home for everyone, everywhere. But before I begin with the sermon, I want to ask you a question. What is one event that you remember from the year 1997? This part of the auditorium can probably think back. This side, where the campus students are, might not have an idea, but I want to ask, what is one event from 1997 that you remember? You see, here are some highlights for me. In the world of sports, the first ever WNBA game was played. And a fun fact, 26 years later, Canada was able to host its first WNBA game this year in Toronto. The name Mike Tyson ring a bell? Well, this was the year that he was in a heavyweight title match with Evander Holyfield, and Holyfield came out with one ear. And this one's for all the golf fanatics here at Milestone. This was the year where a young 21-year-old golfer by the name of Tiger Woods won his very first Masters, making him the youngest to ever do it. In the world of entertainment, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was published. Now, if you're like me, who grew up in the United States, and someone says Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, I say, excuse me, that's not the title of the book, because they changed it to the Sorcerer's Stone. Little fun fact there. Iconic movies like Men in Black, Good Will Hunting, Face Off, The Fifth Element, Disney's Hercules. Let's not forget Titanic, also released that year. Lion King the Musical debuted on Broadway. And Nintendo released the first 64-bit gaming system called the Nintendo 64, forever changing the landscape in gaming. So campus and teens, you can relate to that one. In the world of technology, what happened in 97? Scientists in Scotland revealed the first successful cloning of an adult mammal, a sheep named Dolly. No surprise here, but Microsoft becomes the world's most valuable company. And lastly, IBM. IBM had a chess-playing computer called Deep Blue, and it defeated the chess champion Garry Kasparov during a match that year. The computer won Game 6 of the matchup, becoming the first computer to ever defeat the world champion chess player in tournament conditions. And Deep Blue's win marked an important point in the development of artificial intelligence, as observers noted it as a point when computers' developments began to outpace human development. And as someone who loves technology, IBM's advancing in computing and AI really made headlines that year, making it the hardware of choice for many, and truly taking its model to think to new heights, as it was used to market and encourage people to think IBM. And talking about campaigns, well, this wasn't in 1997, but Jesus also announced the coming of his kingdom with a campaign. The Sermon on the Mount, which is found in Matthew 5 and 6, is all about thinking and living differently. And today I'm going to focus on a passage in Matthew 5 that I believe is one of the most famous sayings in the Bible. A saying, or better yet, a teaching that is shockingly misunderstood, but particularly relevant to today's world. And I believe that this teaching that we're going to look into is potentially the least practiced teaching in Jesus' ministry. A teaching that is going to challenge us and lead us to not think like before or think like how we've been taught, but to unlearn and think different. Do you want to know what it is? Are you ready to find out what we're going to focus on today? As I mentioned, please join me in Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to begin reading in verse 38. And it reads, "You have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow." What did we just read, Chris? This is not the warm and happy Bible story that I came to listen to today, right? Is that what you're asking? Now you can see why I mentioned that this may very well be the most famous passage, but least practiced teaching Jesus' time. And I feel like to really understand this, we need to dig and really see what Jesus was trying to help us see. You see, in this time, the teaching of an eye for an eye was Jewish written law. He was referencing the moral law, the rules of natural justice that were actually found 3 times in the Old Testament, twice in Exodus and once in Leviticus. But can I ask you a question? How many of us are struggling with this passage right now? Because naturally, if somebody was to poke me in the eye, I will probably poke yours right back. I might step on your foot. I might punch you in the gut. And I might kick you a couple of times while you're down, just to call it even. And that may sound excessive, but that's why the law was there in place. It limited revenge in God's terms. It was governed, and today we see some of these same principles in our judicial system today. But the best way to describe how the people of the time were living is that they were living within the law of reciprocity. What? Reciprocity. Essentially, it's as simple as saying, if you're good to me, I'm good to you. If you scratch my back, I'm going to scratch yours. I invite you to my birthday party, I expect one back. Or an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, or we repay evil with evil, and so on. You see, Jesus is changing the way that we are to think of this law. But I want to make something abundantly clear right away. Jesus does not contradict an eye for an eye. He's saying that we don't have to live that way anymore. And it was a step forward in society. So as we read, Jesus had a response to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Did you guys catch what that response was? Do not resist an evil person. Do not resist an evil person. And again, Jesus didn't mean be passive. The word resist here means do not compete. Do not compete with an evil person. By not competing against people who have personally wronged us, we're actually able to reveal to them what God is like. And naturally so, Jesus follows that up with 3 examples on how not to compete with others who we have wronged or who have wronged us. And as a bonus, a 4th lesson just to stir our hearts a little bit, to show us a way to think different so that God's love is shown through our actions. Are you with me? I'm going to break down the passage that we just read. And I'm going to talk about the historical context as to why Jesus was giving the examples that he was. And so with that being said, I want you to join me in my first point, which is have no respect for the status quo. Again, have no respect for the status quo. In verse 39, if someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. This teaching is the most misunderstood, in my opinion. You see, turning the other cheek, again, is not about passivity or allowing yourself to be mistreated. It's not about that. So what is it about? How does it relate to us today in 2023? You see, back then, the expression of being slapped on your right cheek with the right hand was an insult. It was a degrading action. If you was to look at yourself in the mirror and you wanted to slap the person in front of you with your right hand on their right cheek, it's a little awkward to do this, is it not? You would use your backhand. You would use your backhand. Now imagine how insulting that is. You know, later on in English times, you know, they used to take out gloves and say, I pity the fool, or something along those lines. And they will use that as an example. It's an insult. And to make it worse, it was usually always done in front of a crowd. That's how things were done. That was the status quo of the time. And crazy enough, it signified that the person that was being slapped was an inferior to the person that was doing it. That they were beneath them. And that they could not do anything about it. The insult, the damage, it was done. Does that sound familiar to our world today? If anyone in this room has ever been mocked, bullied, spoken ill of, mistreated because of your race, your ethnicity, because of the way that you look, if you've witnessed injustice, if you've ever felt hurt physically or emotionally, if you've ever been abused, I honestly empathize with you. I empathize with you because this passage may raise more questions with the idea of turning the other cheek. But I'm hoping that you're able to see why Jesus was calling us to think different with this action. Again, to repaint the picture, with the slap most likely happening in front of a public crowd, by you turning the other cheek, it was an action on your part. It's a direct response to what happened. In turn, visualize this with me. In turning the other cheek, you demonstrate a willingness to rise above the situation. In turning the other cheek, you are demonstrating a willingness to rise above the situation. You see, back then, the message was sent to the public. The message that was sent to the public is that if you're also going to be slapped on the left cheek after being slapped on the right, that technically you're now being viewed as an equal to the person that slapped you. You're like, excuse me. There's a reason why you were almost an equal. See, back then, if you was to slap somebody with your backhand on their right cheek, it actually was 4 times as worse as just being slapped on your left cheek. 4 times as worse. But if they did it twice, it will actually show the crowd that was viewing this that he's being exposed for the evil person that he is, because he's taking advantage of a situation. Think about it. If I got off this stage right now and I walked up to one of you and I asked you to stand up, and then I just took my hand and whack, what's gonna happen? Are you gonna turn the other cheek? Probably not, right? You're probably, listen, it's in front of a crowd, so somebody here is probably gonna call the cops. A group of you are gonna come and restrain me. Like, what's really going on here? This is gonna end up on social media in one way, shape, form, or another, right? What's happening at that moment is that we have an entire crowd, and then on top of that, an extension of the world watching what just happened. I'm on YouTube right now. It's gonna be on there as well. My evil was exposed. They didn't have that back then. I couldn't get away with something like that today, because it's easier to expose injustice that was done today than it was back then. Back then, the people felt that they had no power. They felt defeated. They were labeled as inferior. And because of Jesus, today we have the power and the permission to be free from that hurt. Amen? Amen. Some of us may have been hurt. Some of us may have been hurt in the past, and we haven't let go of that hurt. The reality is, we can't undo the slap that's already been done. That's the world that we live in. And I want you to hear it from me. You have my support, and the support of many in our church community. But sometimes we need professional help to move on from our past hurts. And if this is you, if this is how you feel, I encourage you to seek that professional help. You see, turning the other cheek, it allows us to break free from hatred and resentment, fostering an environment of love and forgiveness. Isn't that what we truly desire and want for our lives? To be free from hurt and injustice? I mean, talk about a creative way to show strength and character that can disarm those hurting us and open doors for understanding and reconciliation. It's not easy, but this response leads to redemption and reconciliation. We have the power and the permission to stand up against the status quo. And as you know, Jesus had more to say, which leads me to my second point. See things differently. See things differently. In verse 40, if you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. You see, Jesus' second example on how to think different was to give our coat if we are sued for our shirt. And what's the importance of this teaching for Jesus to mention it? And again, how is it relevant to us today? Well, believe it or not, this one was very big because of the meaning behind the coat. And to begin with, if you're being sued, you probably did something. You're probably in conflict with someone, so let's just get that out of the way, right? Back in Jesus' time, no one was ever allowed to sue for a coat. Why? The reason being is that it was a basic necessity of life. The coat was a basic necessity of life. You know, it wasn't just a jacket that looks very nice like this that sits around the waist, but most of the time it reached down to your, to your knees and even longer, and it doubled as a blanket for those cold nights. It was like a sleeping bag. And I mean, unless you're married, you're not going to take away a blanket from somebody when they're sleeping, right? Jokes aside, all jokes aside. Jesus was drawing the attention to the idea that by giving up your coat, you demonstrate a willingness to let go of personal rights and possessions for the sake of reconciliation and peace. Jesus is encouraging us to place greater value in relationships than material things. Put greater value in relationships. Think about it. Throughout history, how many relationships have been broken because of material things? How many of us have had a falling out with family, friends, spouses, business partners, and the like because of material possessions? What do you mean, Chris? I don't know. How about family disputes over an inheritance? Comparing our lives with others? Not agreeing in the percentage of a company that one owns with a partner, and that's just a few that I can think of. It was happening then, and it continues to happen today. And that's why Jesus is calling us to think different. Jesus is reminding us that the true wealth is found in acts of kindness, love, and forgiveness, rather than the accumulations of worldly things. We need to reconcile and put ourselves in a place to forgive so that those we have hurt in some way, shape, or form have an opportunity to reconcile and be in a place of peace. Jesus is calling us to promote selflessness and compassion in this teaching. And that is how we're able to demonstrate God's love. I mean, God did give us his one and only Son, right? So that we can be reconciled with him. And God was very generous with us. And as a result, we can, actually better yet, we should prioritize a relationship with him. And let's not take away that opportunity to show that same love that he showed us to the people that we have done wrong to. Let's prioritize forgiveness and peace. Because when we do, we place greater value in relationships rather than things. And people will see things differently because of it. My third point. Don't be fond of the rules. Don't be fond of the rules. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. That was verse 41. And did you know back then it was customary that a Roman soldier could legally compel civilians to carry their belongings for 1 mile? That's 1,000 steps in their time. You can imagine what that does to you. If chosen, you have to drop everything. You have to drop everything you were doing, and you have no choice but to do what the Roman soldier had asked of you. How does that make you feel? Some of us actually understand how frustrating that is because we may deal with individuals like this in our lives, at work, with friends, or even within your family. I mean, look at me, for example. If you take a look at the screen, you get to see my beautiful family there. Yes, that is 4 kids. And not counting. We just want to get that out of the way. But I do have 4 beautiful children, 7 and under. But don't let the cuteness distract you. You see, number three, London, she's currently potty training. Yeah. Which means when I'm at home, I have to drop everything that I'm doing whenever she says, pee-pee, pee-pee, pee-pee. I'm like, oh gosh, I gotta go grab her. And then I have to carry her 25 steps to the bathroom. And sometimes she goes and we celebrate. And then guess what? Sometimes she doesn't. And that gets me off my game. It frustrates me. And sometimes it's hard to pick up right where I left off because I feel like I'm going to be called in short time to do it again. I have no control of this until she's potty trained. And then I have to go through it again with number 4 in a couple of years. And again, for me, that's just 25 steps. And it throws me off my game. How many steps is it for you? You see, the Jews had to walk 1,000 steps, and once they did, they probably dropped everything right there and then, gave a sad eye to the Roman soldier who was probably in a horse or something, and they had to do something. What do you think it was? Walk back that 1,000 steps so that they can carry on with their day and hopefully get back to what they were doing. God forbid they lost count. But there's a message here that Jesus wants us to understand. Going the extra mile allows us to regain control in situations we initially had no control over. By willingly going the extra step, you demonstrate a spirit of generosity, and additionally, you set yourself apart from those that are only willing to do the bare minimum. From 2014 and 2015, before I got a work visa, I moved here from the States, I was unable to legally work here in Canada. And during that time, I was leading the campus ministry here in Toronto. And I had this constant prayer, more of them, less of me. More of them, less of me. Now, let's get this out of the way. The church and its leadership did not demand that I do this, right? And honestly, I could have just stayed home, wait out the visa process, and be a good Christian and husband as I support my wife, who was actually interning for the church at the time. But I decided to not think of myself and just do the bare minimum. But I decided to be sacrificial with the same time and effort of all the other staff here in Toronto at the time and do it unpaid. And I have been blessed. I have been blessed to see how God has worked in the lives of the young men and women that I ministered to at the time. Many of which now who are actually helping, leading small groups across the greater Toronto area, or even using their gifts and talents for the digital ministry that we have here. And sometimes we have to look at situations and just say to ourselves, more of them and less of me. Show that our decisions to do more than expected allows us to show Jesus' example of being able to give more of yourself for the sake of others. It leaves a lasting impact. It leaves those who are wondering why we are selfless and to go beyond the norm and put ourselves in a position to share our lives, like that's what it does. It puts us in a position to share our lives when we're willing to go beyond the norm. Remember this golden nugget. Sometimes the only Bible people read is your life. So don't settle for the bare minimum. You have more control than you think. My fourth and final point. The only thing you can't do is ignore them. The only thing you can't do is ignore them. Verse 42, give to those who ask and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. And if you're anything like me, well, this teaching really does get under my skin a little bit, doesn't it? We're in unprecedented times where a majority of people feel like we cannot catch a break. Interest rates, rise of cost in grocery items, lack of inventory of both essential and non-essential items. Gas one day is $1.59, the next hour it jumps up to $1.71 a liter, let alone just the topic of money puts us on edge. But to add, give and don't turn away from those who want to borrow, we have many reasons to dismiss this teaching right here. But here's the hard truth. One that we probably don't think of right away. Not all who ask are asking for money. Not all who ask are asking for money. This teaching right here presents us with an opportunity to demonstrate compassion and kindness. Let's go ahead and break it down further. Today, how can I demonstrate compassion? Well, when you're confronted with another person's suffering and feel motivated to relieve that suffering, that's how you're able to demonstrate compassion. And I'll be honest, I know many have been hurt by Christians because of our unwillingness to feel motivated to help people. I've been guilty of it in my 23 years as a disciple. And I know I'm not alone here. People come to church with needs, and sometimes we fail them. We fail to empathize. We fail to recognize that we were asked for help because we, or the person asking for help, recognizes that we have something to offer them. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm proud of Milestone. We have a group here called the Care Ministry that focuses on compassion, that meets the needs of those who need it in our church and community alike. But we can't leave it to a ministry. We all need to have that same heart for each other. And kindness, well, to demonstrate kindness is to sincerely and voluntarily use your time, talent, and resources to better the lives of others. In other words, we don't have to wait for people to come to us with their needs. And I think many times we see or we hear that people are having a hard time, yet we decide that maybe our resources are better off being spent someplace else, or we think that someone else is going to do it. And let's call it for what it is. This passage, Jesus is challenging the idea of us being selfish and greedy, which, let's be honest here, can often dominate our world today. But I've also seen others outside of the church context, outside of calling themselves Christians, be better at showing kindness than people who believe every word Jesus says. And I'm not trying to discourage us, because the reality is Jesus is the one here challenging us today. By giving to those who ask, it is a way of us reflecting God's love by grace and God's love and grace in our lives. It shows us to imitate his character, to show compassion and kindness towards others. By giving willingly, we acknowledge that everything we have is ultimately a gift from God. And that we're called to be stewards of those resources with a spirit of generosity. Our acts of kindness can have an impact on both you, the giver, and the receiver. It cultivates empathy within us as we recognize the needs of others and respond with open hearts. And I know that the people here at Milestone are very generous. For instance, today, right outside these doors, across the 3 different locations where they're simulcasting the service, we're collecting backpacks and school supplies for those families in need in our communities. We are recognizing needs, and we are using our resources to better the lives of others. And we have so much to be proud of here as a family. You know, this teaching can be summed up by simply saying when someone asks for help or assistance, or if you see someone who needs help or assistance, consider how you can extend a helping hand with kindness, compassion, and without hesitation. God has given us everything we need, and we have the opportunity to be like Jesus and offer some of that blessing to others. God will continue to take care of us if we continue to take care of each other. You see, when reflecting on these teachings, I pray that you see that this actually is not as bad as we initially may have felt. And I'm praying that these challenges us in a healthy way that promotes change and encourages us to unlearn what we've known, but to think and act different. Although today's passage is not about competing with others, it truly guides us to see that it's actually about peace, reconciliation, forgiveness, selflessness, compassion, kindness, empathy, generosity, and love. Let's go back to 1997. Let me share what I remember from that time. I was 11 years old. And as I mentioned, the computing market was growing and IBM was leading the way because of its accomplishments. And because they were, their motto, their marketing was think IBM. But then there was also this fruit company that was going through some major losses in that computer market and was living only on 9 months worth of savings before having to potentially have to shut down the doors in their operation. It needed to find a way to be fruitful. And you might have caught on already, but this fruit company was Apple Computers. Steve Jobs came back as the CEO and immediately looked at shaking things up and finding a market strategy that would turn the computing world upside down. This is where a marketing firm did research, and after seeing what IBM's marketing was, they, along with Apple, came up with the motto, which is the title of my sermon today, Think Different. Apple looked at and marketed historical and influential men and women who helped shape the society that they were living in at the time in a campaign called Here's to the Crazy Ones. The campaign featured black and white footage of iconic visionaries such as Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison, Martin Luther King Jr., Muhammad Ali, Mahatma Gandhi, Amelia Earhart, and Pablo Picasso. And while the footage was shown, this was narrated. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. As someone who used to work for Apple, This was a campaign that we all should have known. And you can clearly see where I was inspired, but most importantly, I can't help but see the parallels of Jesus' life and teachings in this. His life could have easily been highlighted in this campaign because he did help push forward society in our way of life. And as I wrap things up and lead us into communion, I'd like to focus on one more passage together. And it's in Matthew 11:28, and starting in verse 28. Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. With everything we've learned today, I pray that we feel like we have a choice to respond, not how we were accustomed to, but how Jesus is calling us to respond. And I encourage you to ask and reflect on this question. Is there an area or situation that I need to start thinking differently and change the way I respond? Is there an area or situation that I need to start thinking differently and change the way I respond? If this is heavy for you, put your trust in Jesus. Give him your burdens. Let him lighten your load. And I'll be honest with you, I find these words of Jesus to actually be less stressful than the ways of the world. Like, it's almost easier to be a Christian than not be a Christian. And everything Jesus was teaching us helps us to become better people, and in turn helps shape and move the world forward. Jesus taught us to think different. And as a result, we need to, as a reflection of him in our day-to-day life, we, every single person here, every person at home, are the people who are entrusted to think different and change the world, not through the mindset of the law of reciprocity, right? Do good to me and I'm going to do good to you. But to shift our mindset and know that we can change the world through peace, reconciliation, forgiveness, selflessness, compassion, kindness, empathy, generosity, and love. Let's go to God in prayer. Most High, we come to you, Lord, just humbled to be here as a family, as a community, hearing your words so that we can in turn impact the many lives of those outside of these walls. We thank you for the opportunities to be able to think different. We thank you for entrusting us to be able to be the difference makers in the world. But most importantly, Father, we thank you for the sacrifice that you have given us in your Son, Jesus. It is through his teachings, it is through his sacrifice that we're able to be here today so that we can carry along that vision that he had for every single one of us. I pray for the emblems, the bread and the wine that represent his body and his blood, Father. And I pray that this week, every person in this room, every person listening online, Father, that they are able to feel empowered to think different and be stewards of the love that you have given us. Father, I love you. I thank you. And we pray this all in your Son's name. Amen.